Deep within the dense forests of West Virginia lies a story that has terrified the local population for decades. It is a tale that blends folklore with a harsh reality that occurred in the 1960s. The town of Point Pleasant sits quietly along the banks of the Ohio River. This small community became the epicenter of a phenomenon that defies logical explanation. Residents whispered of a large winged creature that stalked the night skies. They called it the Mothman. This being was not merely a monster of the imagination, but a physical presence that left tangible fear in its wake. The darkness of the woods seemed to hold secrets that were never meant to be uncovered by human eyes. The legend begins in an area known locally as the TNT area. This location was the site of a former World War II explosives manufacturing facility. The abandoned concrete bunkers were hidden deep within the McClintock Wildlife Management Area. Nature had begun to reclaim the man-made structures by the 1960s. Thick vines and dense underbrush covered the eerie dome-shaped igloos used to store explosives. It was a place of shadows and silence where few dared to venture after the sun went down. The isolation of the TNT area made it the perfect nesting ground for something ancient and unknown. The air there always felt heavier, and the silence was often broken by unidentifiable sounds. The first whispers of the creature did not come from Point Pleasant itself, but from the nearby town of Clendenin. A group of gravediggers working in a cemetery spotted something large lifting off from the trees nearby. They described a brown human being with wings that glided over their heads. This incident occurred just days before the madness descended upon Point Pleasant. The men were terrified by the size and speed of the entity. It moved without flapping its wings and disappeared into the gloom. This initial sighting set the stage for a year of terror that would grip the entire region. The gravediggers knew they had seen something unnatural, but few would believe their story initially. On the night of November 15th, 1966, two young couples decided to drive out to the TNT area. Roger Scarberry and Steve Mallette, along with their wives, were looking for a secluded spot. The night was cold, and the moon cast long shadows across the abandoned industrial site. They drove their 1957 Chevrolet through the twisting gravel roads. As they passed the old North Power plant, they noticed two bright red lights in the shadows. They slowed the car to get a better look. The lights were not mechanical, but appeared to be glowing eyes. The sheer size of the eyes struck immediate fear into the hearts of the four witnesses. The glowing red circles were approximately 2 inches in diameter and spaced 6 inches apart. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they realized the lights were attached to a massive figure. The creature stood roughly 7 feet tall and was shaped like a man, but with large folded wings against its back. It was gray in color and seemed to wobble as it walked. The driver, Roger Scarberry, panicked and slammed on the gas pedal. The car screeched away from the old power plant as the passengers screamed in terror. They sped toward Route 62, hoping to put distance between themselves and the beast. However, the nightmare was only just beginning. As they raced down the highway at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, they looked back. The creature was airborne. It was following them. The witnesses reported that the beast hovered just above their vehicle. Its massive wings were spread 10 feet wide, but they never flapped. It glided effortlessly, keeping pace with the speeding car. The creature emitted a high-pitched screeching sound that resembled a large mouse or a record playing at high speed. The horror of being chased by a flying monstrosity traumatized the young couples. They drove straight to the Mason County Courthouse to find help. They needed to tell someone in authority what they had seen. They found Deputy Millard Halstead and frantically explained their encounter. Halstead had known these young people all their lives and knew they were not prone to making up stories. He could see the genuine terror in their pale faces. He agreed to follow them back to the TNT area to investigate. As they returned to the site, the police radio began to emit strange static and garbled noises. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Halstead swept his flashlight beams across the crumbling bunkers and dense trees. Although they did not see the creature again, that night the deputy felt an uneasy presence. The dust around the power plant was disturbed, but no footprints were found. The next morning, the story broke in the local newspaper, with the headline, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird Creature Something." The press dubbed the entity Mothman after a character from the Batman television series, popular at the time. The name stuck, and soon the entire town was buzzing with the news. Skeptics laughed at the report, but more witnesses began to come forward. The sightings were not limited to the TNT area. People reported seeing the creature in their backyards and on lonely country roads. The hysteria began to build as the frequency of the encounters increased. Point Pleasant was no longer a quiet river town, but a place of high strangeness. Newell Partridge lived in Salem, West Virginia, a short distance from Point Pleasant. On a quiet evening, shortly after the first sighting, he was watching television. Suddenly, the screen went dark, and a strange pattern of herringbone lines appeared. A loud whining sound emanated from the set. Outside, his dog, named Bandit, began to howl aggressively. Partridge grabbed a flashlight and went out to the porch. He shone the beam toward the hay barn where the dog was barking. 2 red eyes reflected the light, just like bicycle reflectors. The eyes were huge and glowing with an intense crimson hue. Bandit raced toward the barn to attack the intruder. Partridge called out to his dog, but the animal did not return. He felt a wave of dread wash over him and retreated inside to get his gun. When he returned to the porch, the red eyes were gone. Bandit was never seen again. The next day, Partridge walked to the spot where he had seen the eyes. He found his dog tracks going in a circle, as if the animal had been spinning in confusion. Then the tracks simply vanished. There were no signs of a struggle or blood. It was as if the dog had been snatched directly into the air. This disappearance added a menacing layer to the growing legend. Descriptions of the Mothman were remarkably consistent among the witnesses. It was always described as a gray or brown humanoid figure, standing 7 feet tall. It had no visible neck, with the head seemingly set directly into the shoulders. The most terrifying feature was always the eyes. They were large, glowing red and hypnotic. The wings were bat-like rather than bird-like, and could fold against its back when not in flight. Witnesses often reported a feeling of pure evil or impending doom when they were near the creature. It was not just an animal, but something that radiated a malevolent intelligence. The phenomenon attracted the attention of paranormal investigator John Keel. He arrived in Point Pleasant to document the sightings and interview witnesses. Keel soon realized that the Mothman was part of a larger tapestry of strange events. He noted reports of unidentified flying objects seen in the skies over the Ohio River. Strange lights of various colors were seen moving erratically at night. Keel believed that the creature and the lights were connected. He began to uncover a series of bizarre coincidences and strange occurrences that plagued the town. The investigation led him down a rabbit hole of paranoia and mystery. One of the most trusted journalists in the area was Mary Heyer. She wrote for the Athens Messenger and began cataloging the reports. Heyer was a no-nonsense woman who initially approached the story with skepticism. However, the sheer volume of credible witnesses changed her mind. She received strange phone calls and visits from odd strangers. These visitors warned her to stop writing about the Mothman and the lights. Heyer remained steadfast and continued her work despite the intimidation. She became a central figure in the unfolding drama, acting as a confidant for those too afraid to go to the police. Another strange element emerged with the story of Woodrow Derenberger. He was a salesman who claimed to have encountered a strange man on the highway near Mineral Wells. An old vehicle forced him to stop, and a man stepped out. The stranger had a dark complexion and a wide grin, but wore a futuristic outfit. He communicated with Derenberger telepathically. The being identified himself as Indrid Cold. This encounter introduced the idea that the Mothman might be an alien entity or interdimensional traveler. The connection between Indrid Cold and the winged creature remained ambiguous, but added to the high strangeness of the time. Throughout 1967, the town was plagued by the men in black. These were not the charming agents from the movies, but menacing figures. They drove pristine black cars and wore ill-fitting black suits. Their skin was often described as olive or unnaturally pale. They harassed witnesses, including Mary Heyer and John Keel. They demanded silence and confiscated evidence. Their speech was often mechanical and stilted, as if they were learning how to be human. The presence of these threatening figures escalated the fear in Point Pleasant. Residents felt they were being watched constantly. The sightings of the Mothman continued throughout the year. Marcella Bennett was driving to the TNT area to visit friends when she encountered the beast. She stepped out of her car and saw a tall gray figure rise slowly from the ground near her vehicle. She was paralyzed with fear as she stared into the glowing red eyes. Bennett dropped her young daughter in panic before scooping her up and running into the house. The creature shuffled onto the porch and peered through the windows. The family huddled inside, terrified, as the entity watched them. This encounter left Bennett deeply traumatized, and she suffered from recurring nightmares for years. The psychological toll on the townspeople was immense. Sleep disturbances and anxiety became common among those who had seen the creature. The feeling of being watched was pervasive. Strange metallic voices were heard on telephone lines. Electronics malfunctioned without cause. The boundaries of reality seemed to be thinning in Point Pleasant. The Mothman was not just a physical threat, but a psychological one. It seemed to feed on the fear it generated. The community was on edge, waiting for something terrible to happen. The sense of foreboding grew heavier with each passing month. Local folklore spoke of the curse of Chief Cornstalk. Cornstalk was a Shawnee leader who had been betrayed and murdered by soldiers at Point Pleasant in the 1770s. Legend said that with his dying breath, he cursed the land for 200 years. He proclaimed that the Red River would run with blood and the people would suffer. Many began to believe that the Mothman was the manifestation of this ancient curse. The timeline seemed to fit as the 200-year anniversary was approaching. The convergence of history and horror made the situation even more desperate for the locals. As winter approached in 1967, the sightings became more sporadic, but the dread did not lift. John Keel began to receive mysterious messages warning of a great disaster. He was told that a blackout would occur and that many people would die. He frantically tried to decipher the warnings to determine the time and place. The messages were vague, often consisting of riddles or broken sentences. Keel felt helpless as the feeling of doom intensified. He warned his friends to be careful, but he did not know exactly what they needed to avoid. Some witnesses reported seeing the Mothman perched on top of the Silver Bridge. The bridge was an I-bar chain suspension bridge connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Gallipolis, Ohio. It was a vital artery for the region. Seeing the creature on the steel structure was an ominous sign. The red eyes glowing in the fog above the river served as a dark omen. Those who saw it on the bridge felt a distinct urge to turn around and find another route. The bridge itself was old having been built in 1928. It was narrow and not designed for the heavy traffic of the modern era. December 15th, 1967 was a cold and gray Friday. The holiday season was in full swing, and the town was busy with Christmas shoppers. The Silver Bridge was packed with bumper-to-bumper traffic at 5 in the evening. Cars and trucks loaded with families and gifts inched across the span. The traffic lights on the Ohio side were causing a backup that filled the entire bridge. The weight of the vehicles strained the aging steel. The sun had set, and the river below was a black void. Unbeknownst to the commuters, the structural integrity of the bridge was failing. Suddenly, a loud crack, like a gunshot, echoed through the air. A single eye-bar in the suspension chain had fractured due to a microscopic defect and years of corrosion. The failure of this single component triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. The suspension chain whipped loose, and the vertical suspenders failed. The bridge shuddered, violently throwing cars off balance. Drivers looked around in confusion as the steel groaned and twisted. In a matter of seconds, the entire structure began to collapse. The horrified screams of the people were drowned out by the roar of tearing metal. The Silver Bridge fell into the freezing waters of the Ohio River. Vehicles plunged 80 feet down into the dark current. Some cars smashed onto the riverbank below, while others were swallowed by the murky water. The scene was one of absolute chaos and destruction. Headlights beamed upward from the depths of the river before flickering out. Survivors who landed on the shallow banks clawed their way out of the wreckage. Those trapped inside their sinking cars had little chance of escape. The water was near freezing, and the darkness made rescue nearly impossible. Rescue teams from both sides of the river rushed to the scene. The sound of sirens filled the night air, replacing the silence of the shock. Boats were launched into the treacherous water to search for survivors. The current was strong, and the debris from the bridge made navigation dangerous. They pulled injured people from the water and recovered bodies. The town of Point Pleasant gathered on the banks watching in horror as their friends and neighbors were pulled from the river. The tragedy was overwhelming. The disaster that had been foretold had finally arrived. 46 people lost their lives in the collapse of the Silver Bridge. It remains one of the deadliest bridge disasters in United States history. 2 of the bodies were never recovered, claiming the river as their final resting place. The community was devastated. Every family in town knew someone who had died or was affected. The joy of the Christmas season was replaced by mourning and funerals. The collapse effectively ended the era of the Mothman sightings. The creature was rarely seen again after that fateful night. The silence that followed was deafening. In the aftermath, connections were immediately made between the Mothman and the bridge collapse. Many believed the creature had been a harbinger warning of the impending doom. Others believed it was a demon that had caused the tragedy. The sightings of the bird on the bridge prior to the fall fueled these theories. The red eyes were interpreted as stoplights trying to halt the traffic. Was the Mothman trying to save them? Or was it watching the destruction with satisfaction? The ambiguity of the creature's motives has fueled debates for decades. Investigations into the collapse revealed that a cleavage fracture in Ibar 330 had caused the failure. The bridge had been carrying a load much heavier than it was designed for, while science provided a mechanical explanation. The timing of the supernatural events could not be ignored by the locals. The convergence of the UFO, sightings the strange creature, and the men in black with the tragedy created a permanent link. The legend of the Mothman became inextricably tied to the death of 46 innocents. It became a story of warning and loss. John Keel left Point Pleasant deeply shaken by the events. He wrote the book The Mothman Prophecies, which detailed his experiences and the strange phenomena. The book cemented the legend in pop culture and brought global attention to the small town. Keel remained convinced that non-human intelligences were manipulating events. He felt a heavy guilt for not being able to prevent the disaster. The mystery of the Mothman haunted him for the rest of his life. He often wondered if the entities were malevolent or simply indifferent observers of human suffering. Since 1967, the Mothman has been spotted in other parts of the world before major disasters. Reports surfaced of a similar creature seen before the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. Witnesses claimed to see a large black bird flying over the reactor days before the explosion. Similar stories emerged from Fukushima, Japan. And shortly before the attacks on September 11th, the Mothman has evolved into a global archetype of disaster. It appears as a grim reaper figure signaling that death is imminent. The legend has grown far beyond the borders of West Virginia. Today, Point Pleasant has embraced its dark history. A 12-foot tall stainless steel statue of the Mothman stands in the center of town. It has silver eyes and steel wings reflecting the sun. Every year in September, the town hosts the Mothman Festival, attracting thousands of visitors. They come to hear the stories, visit the TNT area, and celebrate the legend. The town has turned its trauma into tourism, but the older generation still remembers the fear. For them, the statue is a reminder of a time when the night sky held real terror. Despite the festivals and the merchandise, a lingering dread remains in the woods of the TNT area. The bunkers are still there, covered in graffiti and vines. Brave teenagers still drive out at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of red eyes. Some claim that the creature never left and is merely waiting. They say that when the next great disaster is about to strike, the Mothman will return. The woods are quiet, but it is a watchful silence. The legend serves as a reminder that there are things in this world that we do not understand. the story of the Mothman is more than just a ghost story. It is a psychological thriller that blurs the lines between reality and the supernatural. It taps into our primal fear of the dark and the unknown. The idea that a harbinger watches us waiting for our demise is deeply unsettling. Whether it was a mutant crane, a mass hallucination, or an interdimensional being, the impact was real. The fear felt by the Scarberries and the Mallettes was real. The grief of the families who lost loved ones on the Silver Bridge was real. As you drive down the winding roads of West Virginia at night, keep your eyes on the tree line. Look for the reflection of red lights in the darkness. If you see them, do not stop. The Mothman may be a legend, but the disaster it brings is all too physical. The eyes that watched Point Pleasant in 1966 are perhaps watching still. The Harbinger does not age, and it does not forget. It waits in the shadows for the steel to groan and the ground to shake. And when it spreads its wings, disaster is never far behind.